Welcome to Mission SONlight Chat from the Media Missionaries of Network 7 Media Center. We are in our studio here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in the United States of America. My name is Christopher Beeson. Our Director of Production and Engineering today is Jordan Wagner. Mission SONlight is a nonprofit organization. If you'd like to know more, you can visit us at missionsonlight.org. And if you want to give there, if you want to send us a message, you want to click donate, however you'd like to connect with us, we appreciate whatever you'd like to do for this work. One more thing before we get into today's program, we are interested in touching more lives for Jesus, to share the story of Jesus, to spread the truth as it is in Jesus. So whatever you can do, would you please share the link to today's program with a friend or even an enemy? Post it on your social media, text it to a friend right now, even snail mail it if you want. Share Mission SONlight Chat today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our guest today is Dr. Michael Campbell. Michael, you are, I'm going to say it and then you can clean it up. You are the historian for the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America. Would you put a title to it, if you will?
Sure, that works. Officially, my title is Director of Archives, Statistics, and Research, so I deal with the history of our church in North America and preserving that history, but also with the statistics and helping to facilitate research studies and funding that goes on as well.
So my favorite thing to read are historical pieces, other than, of course, Scripture, which is historical as well.
Glad to hear it.
I'm a big fan of history, and particularly my niche is Civil War and presidential history. Love to read about those. Just curious, do you have a favorite history that you like to dig into?
I like all history,
Okay.
so it's hard to really choose. It's like choosing which is your favorite child, right? But I think Adventist history, so I tend to gravitate towards 19th century and 20th century. So looking at American history during those time periods, as well as world history, and I'm especially interested in the history of missions.
All right. So you touched on my favorite point. I was going to pull out some notes here on my phone. Adventist missions, church missions. I mean, one of the reasons why we have Mission SONlight Chat is to tell the story behind missions. If you noticed as you came into the studio, there's some things sitting off to the side. We have a old sanitarium wheelchair. We have a number of relics from Adventist mission and missionaries. And my desire one day as I collect these various articles is for us to have an Adventist mission museum here in the Chattanooga area.
Very cool.
So just a
I
little,
like it. Hey, keep saving that stuff.
Yeah, just a little side note.
Don't
there.
throw it away. So anybody listening, if you have some old historical artifacts, save them and make sure they get to an Adventist archive or maybe get them to you, right?
We'd love to collect those.
Cool.
So tell me, in your work for the Adventist Church in North America, tell me what exactly it is that you know what, before you do that, I apologize to our listeners and viewers. We normally start with prayer, and I was so excited to talk about history with you, I almost forgot.
We should pray, huh?
Let's have a word of prayer, and then I'll ask you to do that for us.
I'd be delighted. Let's pray. Father God, we're so thankful for this moment to have a chat, to reflect, and I pray that as our listeners also have an opportunity to pause, we just want to lift ourselves up to you, surrender ourselves to you, and ask for your leading and guidance. Bless our conversation. May you be glorified as a result, is my prayer in your name. Amen.
All right, so now tell us, thank you for that, tell us about what it is your work does. Give us some more details.
Sure. So part of what I do, at least in terms of the history side of things, is at the North American Division, our church headquarters for North America, I make sure that our historical records are being preserved and at various levels of the church, whether it's at the local church or conferences or unions, that effective preservation's happening of those documents, whether it's older documents or more recent documents or even electronic documents. So, and of course, you can't save everything. So we have to also have de-acquisition schedules as what are the things that are really important. So one of the things I work on, among other things, is just things as simple as policies, so recommendations, so people know what to keep and what actually to get rid of. So that can vary quite a bit. And of course, internally in the North American Division, we do have our own records that we need to keep. Obviously, most of those are more recent. North American Division really began about 1985. I mean, there was a time back in the early 20th century, we briefly had a North American Division, but having an actual North American division that was autonomous and had agency and everything is a pretty recent phenomenon. So we don't have a huge archive. And so most of what I'm trying to do, obviously we have whatever records we need to have, but is to really, across the division, promoting a sense of our church heritage so that so we're looking at creative ways, curriculum resources, small group resources, developing online media, et cetera, that we can help educate our church members. And then, we have 13 colleges and universities, and most of them have a heritage room. So usually if Christopher, if you came to me and said, hey, I have a box of really cool mission historical artifacts, right? And I'd say, well, I'm really happy. I want to see those preserved, but, maybe we should look at, and there's a number of different places that say, maybe those diaries or letters can be preserved somewhere that they can have access for researchers. So I'm in my passion is preserving our past and promoting it so that we continue to be able to tell our stories. Because one of the things I like to say is the stories we tell, the stories we choose to tell, they matter a great deal, and they're part of our Adventist identity that we can be really proud of.
I like that. Within the Seventh-day Adventist community, we celebrate men, women, children, ethnicity, culture. And recently, just not long ago, you helped lead a special weekend that celebrated women.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about that and some of the, if I use the right word, academia behind that as well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, very excited. We just had our first research conference that is part of the North American Division, part of the department that I manage. And so we appreciate the support of our division leadership and everything to help make this happen. But the vision really was once a year that we go to one of our colleges or universities and that we have a major research conference. This is our inaugural research conference, and we chose as our theme Women in Adventist History because we haven't always done a good job at telling the stories and contributions, and historians now recognize that women have always been the majority of the Christian church, and we have good historical documentation that women have always been the majority of the Adventist church. And by the way, there have been more women missionaries by a significant margin than male missionaries in the history of our church. So when we're even dealing with mission history, we can really need to acknowledge those contributions. And so sometimes I have people tell me, Christopher, if I don't know those stories, if there's so many women that were missionaries and making such a huge contribution, how come I don't know their stories? And so what I've tried to do is tell them, well, just because you haven't heard their stories doesn't mean they didn't exist. And so all we're trying to do with a conference like this, and I'm really excited, we're going to have the recordings and eventually have a book come out of this, maybe even by the time that this podcast is released, that will help to better tell those stories, educate the church about those contributions. And just to be very candid, I think sometimes we get caught up over issues, over debates going on in the church, and we lose sight of the forest for the trees, right? We get so involved in little minutiae like women's ordination, for example. I know it's a big debate within and outside of our denomination, but that's a debate that needs to be discussed. But really, when we're dealing with this conference, we're trying to say, hey, let's not miss, this really important, all these mission stories and the many ways that women have contributed to the spread of the beautiful Adventist message that we have. So we're just trying to better tell those stories.
I love it. I like that theme. As a father of 3 daughters, Jordan, our engineer down there, the father of 3 daughters.
Cool.
I have to correct that. I have a bonus daughter, so as the father of 4 daughters. I'm not used to saying that, but I'm getting used to it.
Yeah.
Women are important in our households is what I'm trying to get to.
Good. All right.
So how would someone be able to see this conference down the road? Would they be able to find an archive of that somewhere?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked. If you go to the Adventist Learning Community, just go ahead and Google that or whatever, and you can find the recordings of this conference there. I'm just excited that that's a resource. And, just as someone, helping to organize it, to have so many different individuals, researchers, historians, scholars come together. I learned a lot myself personally. So it's part of the fun of history is telling stories as you do research. You find new letters and diaries and all kinds of resources. That's what historians do. We find those things and we try to learn and as accurately as possible then share those stories today. And that telling of those stories was what makes history fun.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to take a break. Just a reminder to our audience, you can visit us at missionsonlight.org. It's a place where you can learn more. That's missionsonlight.org. And you, of course, can give there as well. You could shoot us an email with your comments. I want to invite you to share today's link or the entire podcast with a friend by text, social media, even by email. Take a moment right now and share it with someone. As we go to a break, we're going to have a very special break to show to you. Normally we show you a promotion that has to do with one of the ministries of Network 7 Media Center. But Dr. Campbell, we're going to show our audience something that you too would be interested in. A couple of years ago, we went to various Adventist heritage sites, Adventist heritage ministry sites up in the Northeast. And we kind of created this very quick road trip where people could see the sites of some of our Adventist history, the pioneers. And it's a 2-part episode. So in our first break, we're going to take them on the road to this series of Adventist history sites. And I apologize to our listeners who aren't viewing today's program on Facebook or YouTube. If you're just a podcast listener, you can check us out on Facebook or YouTube if you want to see these particular historical videos. Let's see that now.
New York and New England are home to the foundation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. While there are many roads you can travel, many directions you can follow, when you arrive, you'll know you are home as you see your Adventist roots planted deeply and firmly. To begin our journey, we depart from the Ellen G. White Estate at the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist in Silver Spring, Maryland, and head north through Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York, stopping at a little town called Rocky Hill, Connecticut. It was here at the Belden Farm in Rocky Hill that James and Ellen White lived in 1849, and where James first published The Present Truth, which eventually became the Adventist Review and Adventist World magazines that are published today. Heading east to New Bedford, Massachusetts, we find the bridge approach where Captain Joseph Bates was greeted by a Captain Hall and asked for the news. Bates replied that the seventh day is the Sabbath. A few blocks east of the Old Bridge Approach in Fairhaven is Fairhaven Academy, where Joseph Bates attended elementary school, and the North Main Street home where Joseph and Prudence Nye lived early in their marriage. Nearby is the Christian Meeting House on Washington Street that Bates helped build and from which he later dropped his membership because of differing ideology. The historic church now houses a state-of-the-art maritime museum and training facility. The most important site in Fairhaven is the Joseph Bates home, also known as Meadow Farm. The home site, all which is left of the farm, is owned by Adventist Heritage Ministry and is open to visitors. Joseph Bates grew up in the house and lived here for a time around 1840 with Prudy, his wife, and children. Joseph Bates, along with James and Ellen White, was co-founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. From Fairhaven, we head northwest, beyond Boston and its vibrant colonial American history. Atlantic Union College is located in South Lancaster, Massachusetts. Among the many historical sites on and around the campus is the village church, dating back to the General Conference of 1863, when the Adventist Church was formed. The museum at the center of campus is called Founders Hall. Walking these halls reminds us of the passion of early Advent believers to share the hope of Christ's return and honor the joy of the Sabbath. Turning northeast, we travel to a sad little grave in the Elmwood Cemetery of Haverhill, Massachusetts. Hazen Foss was given the prophetic gift prior to William Foy and Ellen Gould Harmon. Foss rejected the prophetic gift, fearing humiliation, and later confessed his belief to young Ellen Harmon that he was a lost man. Further north into Maine are many heritage sites. In Topsham, at the corner of Main and Elm, stands the home of Stockbridge Howland. The Howlands supported the Second Advent work greatly, and in their home, Joseph Bates became convinced of the prophetic gift of Ellen White. Later, James and Ellen White lived with the Howlands, and Henry, their oldest son, lived here for his first 5 years, while the Whites attended the call to ministry. 16 years later, Henry White also died in this home. Nearby in Freeport is the railroad cut where James White worked for less than 50 cents per day, helping cut the rock for the new rail line to be laid here. One day, James was assigned to lead the oxen that were carrying away the boulders. He cut a turn too quickly and lost the entire load, damaging the cart and nearly injuring the oxen. The supervisor, a Mr. George Cobb, suggested to James that he might be better to go back to preaching than to continue working on the rail line. The same George Cobb's grave in Brunswick Varney Cemetery is marked in the most unusual way. Cobb wished for his gravestone to reflect his spiritual death to self in 1843, when James White convinced him of the soon coming of Christ. His marker also reflects his physical death in 1882, when it states he fell asleep in Jesus. Historians and pundits know George Cobb as the man who died twice. To the southwest of the Brunswick area is Gorham, Maine. On the main highway to Fort Hill, just outside Gorham, is a marker noting the birthplace of Ellen G. White. Further up the highway is the North Street Cemetery on the right. Ellen White's twin sister, Elizabeth Harmon Bangs, is buried here next to her husband, Reuben. Just a few feet away is a marker for baby Eva. Elizabeth never made a final known commitment to Christ, and Ellen often wrote, pleading with her sister to accept the truth as it is in Jesus. At one point, she wrote to Elizabeth that her infant daughter, Eva, could meet her at the resurrection. Driving back toward Gorham, you will see Fort Hill Cemetery. In the rear center is the tall marker of Ellen's brother Robert. The siblings were very close, and upon his death she wrote, "I never saw so happy a soul before, in full hope of having a part in the first resurrection." From Gorham, we will travel on to Portland, Maine, Washington, New Hampshire, and Lowhampton, New York.
Welcome back to Mission SONlight Chat. Our guest today, Dr. Michael Campbell with the Seventh-day Adventist Church's North American Division History Department, or you had a better way of putting it there a moment ago. How do you describe
Archives,
it?
statistics, and research. But if you ask my kids, they'd say, I have no idea what that is, but my dad loves to tell stories.
Okay. You're a storyteller. Well, that's where we want to go next is tell us a little bit about your family. Tell us about who Michael Campbell is.
Sure. Well, I've been a pastor. Our family's been missionaries. We've served at our seminary in the Philippines at IS, the Adventist International Institute of Advanced Studies. And my personal journey is I studied my way into the church when I was a kid. I read Great Controversy, neighborhood Bible study group. And when I read Great Controversy as a young person, I just had a sense of calling that, number one, that God had called me to ministry. And that secondly, that I wanted to be a church historian, that this was what was kind of my calling.
Wow.
It just knew that's what God wanted me to do, and I've just never looked back from that. And of course, you and I met in college studying theology and then history, and went on to pursue graduate studies, my PhD eventually. And then I've worked for the White Estate, and again I've worked as a pastor, as a missionary. So really a lot of fun. In college, I met my college sweetheart, Heidi, who was a history and English major. We met in the cafeteria, and as they say, the rest is history, right? And so we fell in love,
no pun intended.
And got married after college, and then went on to grad school.
Now, she was one of your speakers, I believe, in the conference you mentioned in the first segment.
I'm really excited because she's just finishing up her PhD in history and early modern history in England, so the 15 to 1700s roughly. Incidentally, she's working on sermons on St. Paul's Cross, which is this probably the most influential pulpit in London during that time period, and then studying those sermons for how various preachers depicted women. Was it positive? Was it negative? So in a way, you could say my wife is a women's historian, so she's studying gender roles, women's roles, right? And specifically looking, so you never know, Christopher, with sermons, who might, and if time lasts, who might go back and study those sermons, because that's what she's doing. And she's almost done with her PhD in that from Baylor. So just finishing up finishing up her doctoral dissertation. So we're excited that she's getting close to being done.
That we could be praying for Heidi as well.
Absolutely. So she spoke at the conference because that was her bread and butter, right? So this is her area of passion. And she has a new podcast coming out as well on women in Adventist history. that's titled They Also Served, which is from the title of the first book featuring women in Adventist history from 1940. So that's kind of cool. And then we have 2 teenage children that are high school age that we love. We love going traveling together. We love Pathfinders, love nature, a lot of really cool stuff. So they keep us hopping and on our toes.
And you said teenage, so that explains the whole, we have no idea what our dad does, but he likes telling stories, you know.
Yeah, you're right.
They kind of try to act like, oh, that's...
You can empathize, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us, when you're not doing history, when you're not serving as a missionary or as a director at the North American Division, tell us what you enjoy doing.
So I love exercise, and so for me, racquetball is one of my passions, so I love to play. I have several friends that just keep playing on a regular basis. That keeps me exercising. I love national parks, and so when I travel different places, I try to always make sure, if my life goal is to get to all of our 400 and something national park sites, that part of the national park system, and I'm about 3/4 of the way there, so I'm getting close. And then one more final hobby of mine that helps keep me getting exercise and getting out of doors is bird watching. I'm a very passionate ornithologist and just recently passed over 1,000 birds on my life list. So a number of different things that we all have different hobbies, but I like things that get me out of doors and just enjoying and appreciating God's beautiful nature.
My wife and I are both national park fiends as well.
Yeah, do you get the park stamps?
The kids do.
Oh, okay.
The kids do. But she and I have discovered that we've only been married just a little while now, and we've discovered...
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Discovered that many of the parks we visited together, maybe a little more than half, but because we were not together before that, we had visited some, but we both have visited exactly 22. So we thought, okay, we're in pretty good line, you know, trying to see who was ahead. Neither one of us were ahead. We're right
neck and neck.
And neck, yeah. So, and this last summer we visited, I think, about 6 national parks. We've got several on our list for next summer. So
good on you.
Try to keep those on our radar. I appreciate your interest in national parks too. And you know, it's not just about being in nature. There's a huge amount of history of America
in national parks. Yeah, the national historic sites in particular.
Yes.
And one of the things I'm trying to do with my current role is identifying where those historic sites are. I know that you featured some of the ones with Adventist Heritage Ministries, which is awesome. They've done a great job, and you can learn about those more at AdventistHeritage.org. But you can also, there are many more all across North America. So what we're trying to do is better educate. So getting more signage, you know, like historic monuments or markers with different state historical societies. So that's one of the things that's pretty cool that we're trying to do.
That is interesting. Anything else you want to share about your family or your interest or, you know, future plans?
We have a lot of books in our house.
Okay. So you're a reader.
Yes, my whole family are readers. My wife's a reader. So we started out, both of us, with a lot of books, and those just seem to have babies and multiply. So we have about 6,000 books or so, roughly, a little over that maybe. And so one of my wife's professors, Dr. David Bevington, he had his retirement, and I heard he had a lot of books. So I asked him, Dr. Bevington, how many books do you have? And he said, well, Michael, I stopped counting after about 70,000.
Oh, wow.
So we started implementing a new policy. Every book that comes in, a book's got to go out, because we decided we got to kind of get this under control. And he had filled up his house. Check this out. Filled up his house. And then he built a study out in the backyard, a very nice one, a very large one, filled that up with books, and then he ran out of room. So then he bought the house next to him and filled that up with books too. So you can have a lot of books, but in our family, we love to read. Sometimes we have electronic books, but the worst punishment you can have in our house is you lose reading or book privileges, okay?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that trumps everything else. You know you're really in trouble, Christopher.
If you lose your reading time. That is awesome. Wow. Jordan chuckled behind you. Jordan, I think your mom is does she know how many she has?
I believe she has about 5,000.
Okay, so she's
neck and neck.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
She's competitive anyway.
Yeah. All right.
Jordan's mom is a, what do they call that? Is it an audiophile? Somebody who loves to collect books?
Bibliophile.
Bibliophile.
Yeah, bibliophile.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and I like to collect rare books too.
Yes.
So early Adventist books, COVID was really good for me because for book collecting, because I think everyone was home, checking out stuff in their attics, putting stuff on eBay. I found one book, in fact, that I bought for just a couple of bucks, really, and then it arrived, and I looked inside the front cover. You're not going to believe it, but it was signed by Ellen White,
Wow.
one of the founders of our church, and so that was pretty neat. So if anybody's listening, you have a book signed by Ellen White or an Ellen White letter, reach out to Michael Campbell at the North American Division. I'm very happy to help you with that with that situation. Okay.
I'll have to show you on your way out today. I have only collected a few books, nowhere near what you or Dina or your wife's doctor friend there has, but I do have a few rare early Adventist books.
Cool. We got to take a look at those before I go.
A couple that I'm excited about are some of the original books called Steps to Christ by Revel and Company, which was
Fleming H. Revel, the 1892 first edition.
Yeah.
Right. And so Ellen White published her probably most famous book with Dwight Moody's publisher. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's
I've
a
got
first
a couple
edition.
Of them, so I'm
it's a
excited
first
about
edition because it doesn't have the chapter that she later buys back the rights to her own book, so that she can write one more chapter, which is the current chapter that most copies have, God is Love, because she wanted to emphasize that point even more. Plus, she wanted to make the book, to have it translated, and Fleming Revel was not prepared to translate her book in other languages, and so by the time she died, I think it was 33 or 34 different languages that Steps to Christ had been translated into.
So I was excited to have those for many years, and my grandfather passed away, and then my grandmother passed away, and as we were cleaning out the house over several years, we ran across this copy of Steps to Christ, and my grandfather was not a Seventh-day Adventist.
No way.
We discovered that the military... the Adventist Church through the U.S. military,
that's right.
when
There's
you
a
go
military
into
edition.
the boot camp, they're issued a Steps to Christ. And this was my grandfather's copy of Steps to Christ. So
World War II?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So quite an interesting piece to be able to have those.
What a treasure.
Yeah.
Neat.
All right, well, we could go on and on, but we do have to give the folks what we promised. We said we'd show you the second part of the Adventist history video. Take you back into part 2, some other scenes from New England. So thank you for joining us for this edition of Mission SONlight Chat. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap things up, but enjoy this video from Adventist Heritage Ministry sites.
In Portland, Maine, there are many sites from Ellen White's childhood, such as the White's home and hat shop, and the Brackett Street School where Ellen studied. The school was probably only 2 stories when she attended. It was modified to 3 stories after a later fire. Today, it's a deli shop and a creative arts center, which includes an active children's community theater. Crossing the Park Street Commons one afternoon at the age of 9, Ellen Harmon was struck with a stone that permanently injured her health so severely that she could not continue her formal education. Deering Oaks Park is a scenic wood in downtown Portland. A very young Ellen, suffering from depression following her accident, and sensing her inadequacies, spent much time in prayer sitting beneath these trees, seeking God's will for her life. There are numerous other historical sites in Portland, such as the Chestnut Street Methodist Church, where the Whites were expelled after adhering to William Miller's teaching of the Second Coming. Miller had preached of the imminent Second Coming at the Casco Street Christian Church. On the way into or out of Portland, the beauty of Casco Bay, where Ellen White and some of her family was baptized, can best be admired from the Portland Headlight, said to be the most photographed lighthouse in the world. It was built at Fort Williams under the direction of George Washington in 1798. Fort Williams provided protection to Portland during World War II. Traveling west to West Wilton, New Hampshire, we find Uriah and Annie Smith's birthplace, once a saloon. Behind this house is the home where they later lived in childhood. Annie Smith is known for dozens of poems, hymns, and articles, including 3 hymns currently published in the Seventh-day Adventist Hymnal. Uriah Smith was an early administrator and editor in the Adventist Church and publishing work, as well as an inventor, religious liberty advocate, and author, including Daniel and the Revelation. Nearby is the Smith family gravesite, which includes Annie's marker. Uriah's grave is at the Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, Michigan. Nearby is the family plot of James and Ellen White and their family. While not a part of this Northeastern Adventist Heritage virtual tour, the historic Adventist village in Battle Creek is worth visiting, and you can learn more at adventistheritage.org. Before we depart New England, we stop by this grassy field in New Ipswich, New Hampshire. The field was once the potato patch of Leonard Hastings. Hastings believed that Jesus was coming soon. In great faith, he did not harvest his potatoes in the fall of 1844, expecting to be in heaven. When Jesus did not come on October 22nd, the great disappointment followed. That fall, a blight occurred on the potato crops. Hastings' potatoes were miraculously exempt from the blight, and others who had mocked his faith in the second coming were forced to come to him for their potato supply. Further north is the first church where Millerite Adventists kept the Seventh-day Sabbath. Today, this is the historic Seventh-day Adventist Church in Washington, New Hampshire. Second Advent believers, led by Pastor Frederick Wheeler and church elder Cyrus Farnsworth, accepted the Sabbath. In 1845, Joseph Bates visited here to learn more about the Sabbath keepers and accepted the doctrine for himself, leading to that historic conversation with Captain Hall on the old bridge approach upon his return to Fairhaven. The Farnsworth family, part of that early group of faithful, is buried in the cemetery next door, along with Rachel Delight Oakes and Worcester Ball. A fascinating nature trail chronicling the history of the Sabbath through time is located behind the church. Crossing the state line to the northwest near Whitehall, New York, is the William Miller Home and Farm, the birthplace of Adventism in America. In the War of 1812, farmer William Miller served as an Army captain. At Miller's study desk, the Second Great Awakening took hold. Miller, the farmer, after studying the prophecies of Daniel, walked into his maple grove to pray for God's answer how to share what he'd learned. Out of the grove, after that prayer, William Miller was a preacher. His teaching and sermonizing would spark a movement for heaven that would result in tens of millions of Adventist believers preparing to see Jesus over the next 180 years. Original farm structures still stand, and over the years, improvements welcome thousands of visitors annually. Ascension Rock, where many waited for Jesus to come, is a solemn reminder of the seekers who would stand up with great faith and trust in God. Miller Chapel, an Advent church that Miller built after the disappointment, still stands, jointly operated by the Advent Christian Church and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Nearby is the Miller Cemetery. At the top of Miller's gravestone, next to his wife Lucy's, we read, "At the time appointed, the end shall be." Ellen G. White said this of Miller's grave, "Angels watch the precious dust of this servant of God, and he will come forth at the sound of the last trump." Jesus' great commission of Matthew 28, to go, to make disciples, baptize, and teach as we wait for his coming, has been applied to nearly every aspect of the movement that is today the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The media missionary team at Network 7 Media Center and producers of Mission SONlight encourage you to take the spirit of our early pioneers, to go and share the story of Jesus.
Welcome back to Mission SONlight Chat. We are in the studio with Dr. Michael Campbell. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today.
My privilege.
Some closing thoughts about your department, how people could connect. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so we're always cultivating research, new discoveries. I'm really excited because just recently we found the very first edition of The Hope of Israel, which was this periodical in 1844, around which James and Ellen White and Joseph Bates would read some early articles on the Sabbath and some of the ideas about the sanctuary as their earliest pioneers were developing their ideas, their theology. So that copy was not known to exist until recently, and it was discovered in basically a little closet in a back shelf, just buried in some documents that nobody knew was even there. And so that's part of the fun of being a historian, a researcher, is finding sources like that. And there was in the back page of that an announcement of a Millerite conference on McGuire's Hill, just outside of Poland, Maine. And McGuire's Hill is significant in Adventist history because the first place Ellen White, publicly shared her visions was in McGuire's Hill, that same spot. And so there's a lot of history that's there.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's a suburb of Portland?
Just outside of Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. So, and so we're always looking for new historical documents, discoveries. And
what was the name of the book? 1844, Hope of Israel?
The Hope of Israel.
The Hope of
It's a
Israel.
periodical, actually. And so we have 2 or 3 later issues of it, but nobody knew when it started, and we don't have any of the earliest issues. And this is the very first one that got it all started. So it's kind of cool.
Given how much Israel has been in the news, at least at this recording, in recent weeks and months, it's an interesting title.
It is. The Millerites, they had debates about where the role of Israel in end-time events. And so that was a hot topic. But in this case, they weren't debating about modern Israel.
Sure.
They were debating about spiritual Israel being ready for the return of Jesus Christ.
And I think that's an important differentiation that we all make is today, God's people are
being ready
his followers.
For his soon return.
Yes.
That's what it's about. And so we have statistics. So what are the latest statistics, research studies going on? Are people leaving the church? What are the reasons why people come or not? And evangelism. So we're trying to cultivate all those places. And we have our department webpage. We'll flash up a QR code on here and drop in the show notes a link so that those of you that are listening want to find out more, that you can easily go to our website and sign up for our newsletter so that you get regular updates about what's happening in the area of Adventist history, of archives, statistics, and research. So really exciting. There's always so much happening. I never have 2 days that are the same because there's just so much that's going on and across the division. And we have a team of researchers, many different people that all contribute to help us better understand our Adventist identity and what's going on, our trends that are happening within Adventism. So our church leaders at all levels of the church can make the best informed and missional decisions
Amen.
to share the gospel.
You also, when we talked about your personal life, you also have a podcast.
I do. So I have 2 podcasts, actually, but one's on Adventist history, and I do it with my buddy Greg Howell, who just recently completed his doctorate in church history. It's called Adventist Pilgrimage. So once a month, first of the month, we drop a new episode of some exciting new discovery, something new and fresh that we found in the archives that people didn't know about perhaps before. And so it's fun. So if you like Adventist history, check out Adventist Pilgrimage. I also do this in kind of partnership with a good friend of mine, Matthew Lucio, with the Adventist History Podcast. So we call it the Adventist History Podcast Network. Judd Lake does the Ellen White Podcast. So there's several of these in this kind of orbit of Adventist history. I also do one more podcast and that is on the weekly Sabbath School lesson. My colleague from Southwestern, when I was teaching there, Buster Swoops, he and I, we call ourselves Soup, Campbell Soup, and Swoops. And so we go through the Sabbath School lesson each week, and we call it Sabbath School Rescue. So you want something, just a fun little dive into the lesson. We usually have friends. We have the whoever is the primary contributor of the Sabbath School lesson will often have that person on with us too. And we just love that we can dive in and have some conversations about the Sabbath School lesson each week.
So if people want to check out these podcasts, the 3 key names.
So first of all, Adventist Pilgrimage, Adventist History Podcast, and then Sabbath School Rescue Podcast.
Great.
Oh, and not to forget the Ellen White Podcast too.
Sure.
Yeah.
One final word to our listeners or viewers, just anything you want to share as a word of encouragement.
Absolutely. My favorite parts of history, I've studied a lot of different areas, but I love Adventist mission history. I'm working on a devotional, 365 mission stories that will be coming out here in the next year or two. And I've been compiling those stories. But one that I really love comes from West Africa, one of our early missionaries that was there. And he had found a piece of literature. Now, we know some stories. We're just talking about like Hannah More and some of these other missionaries that went out and they were distributing literature. So we don't know exactly how he got this literature, except that he had started studying the Bible. And he heard there were some early Adventist missionaries who had come and showed up. And he went to the mission, traveled a long ways, and then the missionary was gone. He was out somewhere else, I think, getting some medicine for his family, and his family actually had to sail back because they were just so ill. And so when the missionary was gone, this man shows up. He waits for several days. Eventually, he writes the missionary a letter. Please come find me. I want to be baptized. And they were worried. Well, if maybe he's not really committed. And so, and in the letter, he wrote this beautiful thing that not to worry about. And part of the story I didn't mention is that he was the son of a chief. So they're kind of wondering, all that pressure, he might just give up his faith. And at the end of his letter to the missionary, he said, "Please come find and baptize me because Jesus has captured my heart."
Oh, wow.
Jesus has captured my heart. And what I love is seeing how, in our Adventist past, we see the good as well as the bad, but when it's at its best is when people see Jesus.
Amen.
And I love when we see how Jesus has captured our hearts. And so studying our Adventist past, for me, on a very personal level, is an invitation to get to know Jesus better, sharing Jesus, and I hope that our listeners will have an invitation that they too, to have Jesus capture your heart.
Amen. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we're going to wrap up with a word of prayer, so let's do that now. Father in heaven, thank you so much for the time here with Michael and Jordan, and Lord, I pray that your blessing be on both of them. Lord, be with our viewers and our listeners, those who are tuned into the program today, who needed to hear that word of encouragement, who needed to just wanted to hear more of some things happening behind the scenes at the ministry of the North American Division. In whatever way, whatever case, this has been useful. Lord, I pray that you will change lives for your kingdom, and that you will bless and reach into cars, living rooms, exercise spaces, wherever someone's listening to this podcast, and just touch their life for Jesus. Thank you for hearing our prayer, and thank you for your great, great goodness to us. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. That is today's program from the Media Missionaries of Network 7 Media Center. This has been Mission SONlight Chat with our guest, Dr. Michael Campbell. Again, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been really interesting to hear some of the things going on there.
My pleasure.
I am Christopher Beeson, your host, and today's engineer, our director of production, Jordan Wagner. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing our program with others. We thank you for your gifts and your prayers, most of all, especially your prayers. That's all today from our studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is Mission SONlight Chat.